The governor was dying, and every cardiologist in the hospital was either in surgery or stuck in traffic during the worst snowstorm in Boston's history. That's when Miguel Santos, the quiet janitor from the night shift, stepped forward and said 5 words that would change everything. "I used to be a surgeon." Welcome to Human Stories. Ever met someone whose true talents were hidden by their circumstances? If you believe heroes can be found in unexpected places, hit subscribe. Drop your city in the comments. We love seeing where you're watching from. The blizzard had started at 6 p.m. on a Tuesday evening, dumping 3 feet of snow across Massachusetts and bringing the city of Boston to a complete standstill. By 11 p.m., Boston General Hospital was operating with a skeleton crew. Half the medical staff couldn't make it through the blocked roads, and those who were already at the hospital were working double shifts to cover for their missing colleagues. Miguel Santos had been mopping the floors of the cardiac intensive care unit for 3 years. To the doctors and nurses rushing past him in the sterile hallways, he was invisible, just another member of the night cleaning crew who emptied trash cans, restocked supplies, and kept the hospital running while the real medical work happened around him. They saw the janitor's uniform, the gray hair, the quiet man who spoke with a slight accent, and never complained about working the worst shift in the hospital. What they didn't see was Dr. Miguel Santos, former chief of cardiac surgery at Universidad de Chile, who had performed over 2,000 heart operations before a malpractice lawsuit destroyed his career and forced him to flee to the United States as an undocumented immigrant. Miguel's journey to Boston General had been long and painful. Born in Santiago, Chile, he had grown up in a modest neighborhood where his father worked as a mechanic and his mother as a school teacher. From an early age, Miguel showed exceptional aptitude for science and mathematics. His teachers recognized his potential and encouraged his parents to support his education, despite their limited means. Through scholarships and part-time work, Miguel earned his way into medical school at the Universidad de Chile, one of the most prestigious medical institutions in Latin America. He excelled in his studies, graduating at the top of his class and earning a coveted position in the cardiac surgery residency program. His natural talent for surgery, combined with an almost obsessive dedication to his craft, marked him as someone destined for greatness in his field. During his residency, Miguel spent countless hours in the operating room, learning from the masters of Chilean cardiac surgery. He studied every technique, memorized every anatomical variation, and practiced his suturing skills until his hands moved with the precision of a concert pianist. His colleagues marveled at his steady hands and his ability to remain calm during the most complex and dangerous procedures. After completing his residency, Miguel joined the staff at Hospital del Salvador, one of Chile's leading cardiac centers. Over the next 15 years, he built a reputation as one of the finest heart surgeons in South America. Patients traveled from across the continent to be treated by him. He published numerous papers in medical journals, trained dozens of younger surgeons, and was appointed chief of cardiac surgery at the age of 42. His life was everything he had dreamed of as a young medical student. He had a beautiful wife, Maria, who was a pediatrician. They had 2 children, Sofia and Diego, both bright and talented like their parents. They lived in a comfortable home in a good neighborhood of Santiago. Miguel's parents were proud of their son who had risen so far above their humble beginnings. But everything changed on a rainy evening in September, 5 years before the snowstorm in Boston. A 26-year-old man named Carlos Mendoza was brought to the emergency room with a gunshot wound to the chest. The bullet had damaged his heart, and without immediate surgery, he would die within minutes. Miguel was called in from a family dinner to perform the emergency operation. The surgery was technically perfect. Miguel repaired the damaged heart tissue, controlled the bleeding, and stabilized the patient's condition. For the first 24 hours after surgery, Carlos seemed to be recovering well. But then complications developed that no one could have predicted or prevented. A blood clot formed in one of the heart's chambers and traveled to Carlos's brain, causing a massive stroke. Despite aggressive treatment, Carlos died 3 days after the surgery. Carlos's family was devastated, and understandably so. He had been their only son, a promising young architect who had been caught in the crossfire of a gang dispute. In their grief and anger, they needed someone to blame. Their lawyer, sensing an opportunity for a high-profile case and a substantial settlement, convinced them that Miguel had been negligent during the surgery. The lawsuit that followed was a nightmare for Miguel and his family. The media sensationalized the case, painting Miguel as a reckless surgeon who had sacrificed a young man's life through incompetence. Medical experts testified on both sides, but the emotional testimony of Carlos's grieving parents swayed public opinion against Miguel. Despite the fact that multiple independent reviews found no fault in Miguel's surgical technique, the court ruled in favor of the plaintiffs, citing what they called inadequate post-operative monitoring. The financial judgment was devastating, but worse than the money was the destruction of Miguel's reputation. Overnight, he went from being one of Chile's most respected surgeons to a pariah in the medical community. Patients canceled their appointments. His colleagues, worried about their own reputations, began to distance themselves from him. The hospital, facing public pressure and concerns about liability, asked for his resignation. Miguel's wife Maria stood by him through the ordeal, but the stress took its toll on their marriage. Their children faced bullying at school from classmates who had heard their parents talking about the doctor who killed someone. Miguel fell into a deep depression, unable to comprehend how his life had fallen apart so completely, despite having done everything correctly. For months, Miguel tried to rebuild his career in Chile, but the stigma of the lawsuit followed him everywhere. No hospital would hire him. His applications for positions in other South American countries were rejected. His savings dwindled as legal fees and the court judgment consumed his family's resources. He and Maria fought constantly, their once happy home now filled with tension and recrimination. In desperation, Miguel made the agonizing decision to leave Chile and try to start over in the United States. Maria refused to come with him, choosing to stay in Santiago with their children where she could continue her pediatric practice. Their marriage, already strained to the breaking point, ended in divorce. Miguel said goodbye to his children, promising them he would return once he had re-established his medical career in America. But America proved to be far less welcoming than Miguel had hoped. He arrived in Boston with a small amount of money, a suitcase full of clothes, and his medical credentials from Chile. He quickly discovered that practicing medicine in the United States as a foreign-trained doctor was nearly impossible without going through years of additional training and certification. The process required him to pass multiple examinations, complete a residency program in an American hospital, and obtain sponsorship from a medical institution willing to support his application for a medical license. Each step cost thousands of dollars and required documentation that Miguel, now undocumented after his tourist visa expired, could not provide. Miguel applied to dozens of hospitals for residency positions, but his applications were rejected. Some hospitals were concerned about his legal status. Others were skeptical of foreign medical credentials. Many simply had no openings for someone his age who would need to repeat training he had completed decades earlier. The few interviews he managed to secure ended when potential employers learned about the lawsuit in Chile. As his money ran out, Miguel was forced to take whatever work he could find. He washed dishes in restaurants, worked construction jobs, and delivered food. But these jobs barely paid enough to cover rent for a small room in a boarding house in Dorchester. He sent what little money he could spare back to Chile to support his children. But it was never enough. At night, alone in his tiny room, Miguel would take out his medical textbooks and review surgical procedures. He practiced suturing techniques on pieces of fabric and fruit. He built crude surgical simulators from materials he found at thrift stores. He refused to let his skills deteriorate, even though it seemed increasingly unlikely he would ever use them again. After 2 years of struggle, Miguel saw a job posting for a night shift janitor at Boston General Hospital. The irony was not lost on him. The famous cardiac surgeon applying to clean the floors of an operating room. But he needed the work, and being in a hospital environment, even as a janitor, felt closer to his true calling than washing dishes or laying concrete. He was hired without anyone at the hospital knowing about his medical background. He showed up on time, worked hard, and never complained. To his co-workers and the janitorial staff, he was just Miguel, a quiet older guy who kept to himself. To the doctors and nurses who rushed past him in the hallways, he was invisible. At 2:43 a.m., the emergency call came in. Governor Patricia Richardson had collapsed during a late-night session at the State House. Her security detail had rushed her to Boston General, the closest hospital, where the emergency room staff quickly determined she was having a massive heart attack, the kind that kills within minutes, if not treated immediately. Dr. Emily Chen, the head of cardiology, was in the middle of emergency surgery on another patient. Dr. Robert Martinez, the senior cardiac surgeon, was stuck on Interstate 95, his car buried in a snowdrift 20 miles from the hospital. Dr. Sarah Kim, the only other qualified heart surgeon on staff, was at Massachusetts General across town, unable to travel through the storm. The emergency room staff had done everything they could. They'd administered clot-busting drugs, inserted a breathing tube, started multiple IVs. But Governor Richardson's heart was barely beating, and the EKG showed massive damage to the left ventricle. She needed immediate surgical intervention, or she would die within the hour. "We need to transfer her to Mass General," Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the emergency room physician, said desperately. "They have a cardiac surgeon on duty." "The roads are impassable," the paramedic reported. "We can't get an ambulance through, and the helicopter can't fly in this storm." "We're on our own." That's when Miguel Santos, who had been quietly cleaning to the crash cart in the corner of the trauma bay, stepped forward. The room fell silent as the janitor approached the medical team gathered around the governor. "I used to be a surgeon," he said quietly, his accented English clear and steady. Dr. Walsh looked at him with a mixture of confusion and irritation. "Sir, please step back. This is a medical emergency." "I know what it is," Miguel replied, moving closer to examine the governor's chart. "Massive anterior wall myocardial infarction with cardiogenic shock. She needs immediate revascularization, probably a multi-vessel bypass. You have maybe 40 minutes before the damage becomes irreversible." The medical team stared at him in shock. This was not the vocabulary of a janitor. If you want to see how a janitor's true identity saves a life when every other option has failed, make sure you subscribe to Medical Hero Stories, because what Miguel does next will prove that sometimes heroes hide in the most unexpected places. Dr. Walsh was the first to recover from her surprise. "Sir, I don't know what medical shows you've been watching, but this is real life. Security." But before security could arrive, Miguel continued, his voice gaining authority and confidence. "Her blood pressure is 70/40, heart rate 120, and those ST elevations in leads 1 through V6 indicate a massive LAD occlusion. The Killip Class 4 presentation means cardiogenic shock. She needs emergency surgery now, not transport to another hospital." Dr. Walsh looked at the EKG again, then back at Miguel. Everything he'd said was not only correct, but demonstrated a level of medical knowledge that took years to acquire. "Who are you?" she asked quietly. Miguel reached into his wallet and pulled out a faded medical license from Chile. "Dr. Miguel Santos, former chief of cardiac surgery at Hospital del Salvador, Santiago. 25 years of experience, over 2,000 successful heart operations." The room erupted in whispered conversations. Half the staff was skeptical, convinced this was some kind of elaborate hoax. The other half was desperate enough to consider any option that might save the governor's life. Dr. Chen's voice crackled over the intercom from the operating room, where she was still working on another patient. "Walsh, what's the status on Richardson?" "We have a situation," Dr. Walsh replied carefully. "Our janitor claims to be a cardiac surgeon from Chile. Says he can operate." There was a long pause before Dr. Chen responded. "Put him on the phone." Miguel took the handset and began speaking rapidly in medical terminology, describing the governor's condition, the surgical approach he would recommend, and the equipment he would need. His voice was calm, confident, professional. The voice of someone who had made life and death decisions thousands of times before. After 5 minutes of detailed medical discussion, Dr. Chen's voice came back over the intercom. His knowledge is real. But Miguel, if you haven't operated in years, if your hands aren't steady, if you've lost the skills. I practice every night, Miguel said quietly. On oranges, on pieces of meat, on surgical simulators I built in my apartment. I never stopped being a surgeon. I just stopped being allowed to be one. The weight of the decision fell on Dr. Walsh. She could refuse, follow protocol, and watch the governor die while they waited for help that couldn't come. Or she could trust a janitor who claimed to be one of the most experienced heart surgeons in the room. The governor discovered a nurse from the Philippines working as a medical assistant because her nursing credentials weren't recognized in Massachusetts, an anesthesiologist from India working as a hospital transporter, a general surgeon from Egypt working in the cafeteria. All of them highly trained medical professionals who had fallen through the cracks of America's complex medical licensing system. The governor's near-death experience became a catalyst for immigration and medical licensing reform in Massachusetts. Within 6 months, she had signed legislation creating pathways for qualified foreign medical professionals to have their credentials evaluated fairly and to receive the additional training necessary to practice in the United States. The new law established a streamlined process for credential verification, created mentorship programs to help foreign-trained doctors navigate the American medical system, and provided financial assistance for the examinations and training required for licensure. It also offered legal protections for undocumented medical professionals who came forward to have their credentials evaluated, giving them a path to legal status if they qualified to practice medicine. Miguel was the first beneficiary of the new program. Boston General Hospital sponsored his medical licensing process, providing him with the supervised practice hours and examination preparation he needed to become certified to practice medicine in Massachusetts. The year that followed was both challenging and redemptive for Miguel. He had to pass multiple examinations covering American medical practices and legal requirements. He worked long hours under the supervision of Dr. Chen and other attending surgeons, relearning procedures according to American protocols and regulations. He studied English medical terminology and American healthcare law. He attended workshops on cultural competency and patient communication in the American healthcare system. Throughout it all, Miguel maintained the same humble, hard-working attitude that had characterized his years as a janitor. He arrived early, stayed late, and treated everyone from the hospital CEO to the newest janitor with equal respect. His fellow doctors were impressed not just by his surgical skills, but by his character and his genuine commitment to serving patients, rather than seeking glory or recognition. A year later, Dr. Miguel Santos was appointed as an attending cardiac surgeon at Boston General, the same hospital where he'd worked as a janitor. His colleagues, the same doctors and nurses who had barely noticed him during his years of invisibility, now sought his expertise on the most challenging cases. The transformation was remarkable, not just for Miguel, but for the hospital's entire approach to recognizing talent regardless of its packaging. The janitor who had been ignored for 3 years became one of their most respected surgeons, known for his humility, his dedication to teaching, and his unique perspective on what it meant to serve others. Miguel never forgot the lessons of his years in exile. He treated every patient with the same respect, regardless of their background or social status. He mentored young doctors and nurses, teaching them that medical expertise could be found in unexpected places. And he continued to work occasional night shifts, not as a janitor, but as the attending surgeon who was always available for emergencies. He also became an advocate for other foreign-trained medical professionals trapped in similar situations. He spoke at medical conferences about the need for more inclusive licensing procedures. He mentored other immigrant doctors through the certification process. He worked with Governor Richardson's office to expand and improve the programs that had given him a second chance. Miguel's story also had a personal impact that extended beyond his professional redemption. His ex-wife Maria, hearing about what had happened, reached out to him for the first time in years. Their children, Sofia and Diego, now young adults, traveled to Boston to see their father and witness his return to surgery. While Miguel and Maria did not reconcile romantically, they rebuilt a friendship based on mutual respect and shared pride in their children. Sofia, who had been studying architecture, was so inspired by her father's perseverance that she changed her career path and entered medical school. Diego, who had become a lawyer in Chile, began specializing in medical malpractice defense, determined to help doctors who face situations similar to what his father had endured. Governor Richardson made a full recovery and returned to her duties. But she never forgot the night when a quiet janitor stepped forward to save her life. At the ceremony where Miguel was officially welcomed back to the medical profession, she said, "Dr. Santos taught us all an important lesson. Heroes don't always wear scrubs. Sometimes they wear janitor uniforms. Sometimes they've been invisible to us for years, waiting for the moment when their true calling becomes undeniable." The story of Miguel Santos became legendary in medical circles, not just for the dramatic surgery, but for what it revealed about the hidden talents within hospital walls. His experience led to programs in hospitals across the country designed to identify and support healthcare workers with unused medical training. Boston General Hospital established the Miguel Santos Fellowship Program, which helped foreign-trained medical professionals working in non-medical positions at the hospital to obtain proper certification and return to their true professions. Within 3 years, the program had helped 27 doctors, nurses, and other healthcare professionals resume their medical careers. Other hospitals followed suit, creating similar programs and training their staff to look beyond job titles and see the potential in every employee. Medical schools began offering courses on cultural competency and implicit bias, using Miguel's story as a case study in how assumptions and systemic barriers can hide talent and waste human potential. The impact extended beyond the medical field. Miguel's story became a touchstone in discussions about immigration reform, professional licensing, and the need for more inclusive systems that recognize international qualifications. He was invited to speak at universities, community organizations, and even before congressional committees considering immigration legislation. Despite his growing fame, Miguel remained remarkably humble and grounded. He continued to live modestly, saving money to send to his children and to support other immigrant medical professionals. He never forgot what it felt like to be invisible, to have skills and knowledge that no one wanted to see or acknowledge. Miguel's patient log now includes hundreds of successful surgeries, and his reputation as a cardiac surgeon is unquestioned. But ask him about his proudest moment, and he'll tell you about the night he stopped being invisible and became, once again, the doctor he'd always been inside. He keeps a photograph in his office at Boston General, taken during his years as a janitor. In the photo, he's mopping the floor of the cardiac intensive care unit, his gray hair visible beneath a janitor's cap, his expression patient and resigned. He keeps it there to remind himself and his students that dignity exists in all work, that every person has value regardless of their job title, and that circumstances beyond our control can force us into situations that don't reflect our true abilities or potential. The snow from that historic blizzard melted weeks ago, but the change it brought to Miguel Santos and Boston General Hospital remains. Sometimes it takes a crisis to reveal who people really are, and sometimes the person you've been ignoring is exactly the person you need the most. Where are you watching from? Have you ever met someone whose true talents were hidden by circumstances beyond their control? Share your stories in the comments below. And if this story reminds you that heroes can be found in the most unexpected places, make sure to subscribe for more real-life medical stories that prove extraordinary people are often hiding in plain sight. Miguel Santos proved that expertise doesn't always come with the expected credentials, and that sometimes the most qualified person in the room is the one everyone assumed was least qualified. The next time you see someone in a service job, remember that you might be looking at a hero whose true story you've never heard. His journey from respected surgeon to invisible janitor and back to honored physician represents more than just one man's redemption. It represents a challenge to all of us to look beyond the surface, to question our assumptions, and to recognize that talent, skill, and heroism can be found in the most unexpected places and the most unlikely people. Miguel Santos reminds us that the person emptying your trash can might once have saved lives, and given the right circumstances, might do so again.